Good morning. Welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder. This is BRN AM for Tuesday, March 9th, 2021. And our top stories today, building alternatives to using cookies to track website usage and the continued vulnerabilities of the power grid. Well, joining me now to discuss this and a lot more is Daniel Klein. He's lead advisor, executive producer for 7 Investing. Dan, great as always to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jeff.
So, Dan, saw a really interesting story about Google no longer supporting third-party cookies, and that led me to think, what is a cookie? I know a cookie like an Oreo cookie or a chocolate chip cookie, but I wanted to come to you because I think this is a significant, potentially a significant development, but why don't you weigh in?
Yeah, Jeff, this is a terrible day for Mrs. Fields. This is not going to be good for Otis Spunkmeyer. No, just kidding. Cookies are basically little pieces of digital information that track your behavior. And in theory, you go, okay, I'm looking for a new car, and you search for Toyota Prius reviews. Well, in theory, Google would then know to serve you ads based on that. But we're kind of moving away from that world. And Google is getting ahead of it by saying, look, we're not going to do that anymore. We're not going to track your internet behavior and use it to serve you ads. Instead, they're going to do that on a much more aggregate level. People who sort of look like what Jeff looks like are going to get these certain ads. And the reality is, we all know that as much as this is supposed to work, third-party cookies have never worked all that well, because I brought up the example of a car because I just bought a used car. I traded in my Nissan Sentra for a Toyota Prius, and I did look up a lot of Prius reviews. And guess what ads I see a ton of now? Used cars and Priuses. And well, I bought one last week. I'm not going to buy another one for 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 years. So I do think we see Google getting ahead of the curve. We've seen Apple make some moves to protect privacy. I think the next dominoes to fall are going to be Facebook and Twitter and other places that have sort of violated people's privacy in the past. Consumers don't really know what's going on, but they know they don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, look, you give a great example. I mean, I can tell you if I shopped for RAM for my computer, I get bombarded with new computer ads, RAM ads, support ads, et cetera, from numerous places. What does it say in terms of privacy? If I want to shut off those cookies, is it possible, Dan, to protect my privacy? And, I use Firefox as an example, which is a web browser. There's Google Chrome, there's Microsoft Edge, there's Safari from Apple, and there are a gazillion others, right? Is there a way to protect your privacy so that you don't get those pop-ups?
So there is. There's obviously settings on your browsers. There's also, your virus protection software will sometimes have privacy settings. But there's a lot of ways for companies to get around it. And it really is better if it happens on an institutional level. So, Google controls a very large part of the ad market. When they're basically saying, we don't need this, and here's the reality. On an aggregate basis, men ages, 34 to 59 or whatever the age group is are most likely to be interested in this, and here's based on why. And if you're this type of group who maybe goes to sports websites, you want to see this. That type of ad has always worked for television. And yeah, we're seeing hyper ad targeting on places like Roku and and other services, but that's based on actions in the moment. So sure, if I'm Googling used cars, it's great for Google to serve me targeted advertising content because that may feel like real content. But if I Googled used cars 2 weeks ago, that's not the same thing. So I think moving away from this might actually result in more privacy and better advertising results. I mean, do you feel like the ads during the Super Bowl, some of them target you, some of them do, and hey, there's a new, Top Gun sequel coming out. I didn't remember that. Like, great. Advertising works on that gross level. I know there's this sort of always been this push to let's give Jeff exactly what he wants. That tends to not go that well. That's why so many of the books Amazon recommends me are not books that I would ever intend to read.
Dan, let's talk about this balancing act, because we've talked about this for the last 2.5 decades since the inception of Facebook and other social media platforms. Really, it's free, but it's not really free. Are we seeing a shift? Because if you eliminate some of these cookie trackers, You eliminate the ability to target. If targeting isn't done as efficiently, do you see companies, and I've even read, and you may even talk about this, but I've even read where Twitter is considering a premium version of its service, maybe because it sees the future, and maybe the future isn't necessarily ad-driven tech or ad-driven platforms. What do you think about that?
No, I think this changes nothing. So, yes, you might see Twitter move into a preferred user, and that's to compete with the Patreons and the OnlyFans of the world. And we all know the nefarious uses for those sites, but there's also plenty of musicians or writers. It's to compete with, say, Substack, where a writer might lose his job. Maybe you cover the Baltimore Orioles and you're really well known for that, and you get laid off at the newspaper. So instead of going to work for the Athletic or ESPN or whoever else might be hiring, you start your own Substack, which is basically a paid newsletter covering the Orioles. And maybe you back that up with a Patreon where people who just like your work and want access to it can subscribe for 5, 10, 15, 20, whatever the amount is. Twitter is looking to compete with that. That doesn't really change their advertising business. It's just they see what's out there in the world and they say, oh, we have all these people. Like that writer is using his Twitter to drive people to his Substack or his OnlyFans or his Patreon or whatever it is. Why would we let them do that when we could just give them a better product on our platform? So, Twitter is evolving. I expect Facebook to evolve. And I expect ads to be targeted just less based on violating your privacy. I think the perception of privacy is somewhat valuable to people. I'll say I have no expectation of it. If I go online, I fully recognize that anything I do is being captured somewhere, and it will be used, let's say, for me to show me ads or whatever it is, or against me to show me ads or for whatever it is. I do think the world's going to get more subtle, and if you have Apple and Google driving for more privacy, for opt-ins and permissions, rather than sort of the default being, yes, you have to accept this, pretty much everybody else has to follow.
Yeah. Last question, Dan. Who does ad targeting the best? Is it the Rokus, the Plutos, the Twitters, the Facebooks? I mean, in your estimation, you've been in the digital game for a long time, writing, part of the Motley Fool, Microsoft, now 7 Investing. Who does it the best? Meaning they get you the ad to the area, to the person, to the demographic that is that really advertisers want to drive to.
Yeah, it's Facebook. And it's not because of what I do on Facebook. It's because what I've told Facebook. I've told Facebook my age. I've told Facebook I'm married. I've told Facebook I have a kid. I've told Facebook I live in West Palm Beach. So if a local restaurant here wants to do a targeted campaign, or I'll give an example, the steakhouse that I go to where I also shop at they have a really nice market and they do pop-up barbecue on the weekends. I go there, probably once every other week. On the same property, they just launched a seafood restaurant. And I've seen targeted Facebook content based on that. That you don't need to know me all that well. You don't need to know that I go to that restaurant regularly. You just need to know that I'm my age group, my income bracket, and I live 2 miles away. Like that's really targeted. And Facebook can only do that because it has such amazing density and volume. You could eventually go to Roku and get that kind of targeting. But the Roku channel has, I don't know the number, 65 million people. Facebook probably has 65 million people in the Southeast. When you're talking a company, that's billions of active users, they can, on a gross level, really give you what you want. Like, look, I'm a New York Rangers fan. All pandemic, they've been sending me New York Rangers COVID mask ads. You know what I've purchased more than once? New York Rangers COVID masks, because it's a very, very targeted ad.
Yeah. Dan, very interesting. And I think a lot of people need to be awakened if they're not already awakened to privacy and what their data is being used for. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the cyber vulnerabilities of not only the American power grid, but power grids around the world. You're going to want to stay tuned right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? Especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network.
Are you stuck with a low credit score? A credit report and score that's causing you to be denied credit or pay higher interest rates than others for the same things? Then do what Terrence did and call Credit Repaired for your free credit evaluation to help restore your credit.
I started thinking about buying a new house, and my score wasn't where I needed it to be. I called and spoke with one of the representatives, and we just had a good conversation, and I liked what he was saying.
Just one call for his free credit evaluation was all it took to start back on the track to repairing his credit.
I'm seeing the deletions and I'm getting the report, so I know something's being done. It does make a difference to me.
All it takes is one call to get started.
Credit Repair has given me a second chance to have a better credit score.
Don't let a low credit score hold you back another day. Do what Terrence did and make the call for your free credit evaluation.
Call 800-819-4152. That's 800-819-4152. Again, 800-819-4152.
Welcome back. We're talking to Daniel Klein. He's lead advisor, executive producer for 7 Investing. Dan, thanks for staying with us this morning.
Thanks for keeping me.
Dan, we're going to shift from ads. Let's talk about cyber. We always talk about cybersecurity and cyber vulnerabilities, but one in particular really kind of gets me nervous. They all do get me nervous. This one does, especially disruption to the power grid. And we saw what happened in Texas. That was not cyber related, to the best of both of our knowledge, and I think knowledge in general. That was weather related. But you can see what happens when you don't get power to people. You can't heat, you can't cool, you can't cool food. It makes things really difficult. We kind of go back into a third world type of environment. Dan, what about the risks here? Are we at risk? Are we at risk, and are others at risk in terms of our power grid?
We are. So we've learned over the past, let's call it 2 decades, that power grids are vulnerable. We've always known they were weather vulnerable. We watched what happened in Puerto Rico, where we learned, really how underbuilt the power grid was, and that this wasn't a case of, yep, there's a hurricane, something gets broken, you fix the something, and then it goes back up. You really saw systemic weakness. But I experienced the same thing 5 or 6 years ago in Connecticut. We had an ice storm. And it was a freak storm. It happened, while leaves were still on the trees, so the trees were heavier, brought down a lot of power lines, and I didn't have power for 8 days. And living in Connecticut in the winter, it wasn't late winter, it was kind of early winter, with no power was difficult. Bundled up and cold, and no food, and waiting in long lines at Barnes and Noble to get an outlet to charge my laptop and things like that. But those are sort of expected anomalies. What happened in Texas, as freaky as it wasn't, cybercrime related. And what happens is, the biggest problem in the U.S. is there's no national strategy on this. There's no national security for our power grid. Here in Florida, we have multiple power grids. In Texas, there is at least one organizing group, but there are multiple power grids. So as a nation, we're kind of only as strong as our weakest place. And are you, Jeff, 100% convinced that, say, the power grid in Alabama is adequately protected from cybercrime?
No.
Yeah, I'm not either. And, I think as a nation, we need to look at our overall vulnerability. We've seen how we can be manipulated on social media, that there's armies of Russian robots that are trying to manipulate public opinion. And it's something people are vaguely aware about, but doing something like bringing down a power grid during a time of crisis can be a problem, because at least What happened in Texas, as bad as it was, at least the rest of the country was fine, so you can mobilize aid and bring in help and sort of deal with it. When we've seen sort of bigger crises, things that affect more of the country, it then becomes difficult. Well, where do you put the help from if it's the whole East Coast that goes down? Well, that becomes a problem. The scale of it becomes a problem. So I don't know a solution for this, but I do think as a nation, we're not doing a good enough job in government in bringing the best and the brightest into protecting us. Like, look, would I want the government to contract out our cybersecurity, to one company? No. But do I think they should be creating some agencies that pay appropriate salaries to bring in the experts who then can go out and contract with, with the right companies, to figure out how to protect this? Yeah, I think that's important. We have the expertise here, but we've seen it. I mean, Jeff, we've joked about the congressional social media hearings when people who've never been on Facebook grill executives and have no sense of what's going on social media, or they have no idea what Snapchat is and they're trying to regulate it. I think that's a massive problem when you talk about security, and we need some percentage of our best and our brightest working for government, and that does involve sort of ripping up government norms when it comes to salary. If I could make millions of dollars working for Google, why am I going to go take 180 grand a year to work for the federal government? So I think we need big changes to how we do this, and we need to consult the Bill Gateses of the world, the Elon Musks of the world, God forbid, and start figuring out how we do this as a nation. Let's not talk to Elon Musk. Let's find someone a little more stable there.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, we have, I guess since the 70s, begun in 80s, begun to automate a lot of these plants. And it makes a lot of sense because when you automate an electrical plant, or you automate a plant in general, you're able to make sure that you get consistent feeds of electricity. There's no spikes, that notifications are properly sent out to people to notify people when there are issues that need to be resolved. It allows you also to reduce overhead because you don't need as many people to staff, which means potentially lower costs for energy, lower costs for production. But at the same time, this creates vulnerability. And we have seen hackers, I can't name the exact districts, but we have seen hackers find their way in. And to be a hacker, you don't need a huge amount of capital. You need a nice computer, you probably need good bandwidth, you need to be able to mask your IP address, you need to be able to do certain things that I really don't understand. But anybody can be a hacker. Bad sovereigns can be an actor. Bad sovereigns can be bad actors. Or you can have people in your own country do that. Is the push to automation, does that give you any pause to say, okay, automation's great. We need to be strategic about where and how we automate at all?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. So you need to build in your fail-safes. And I don't want to suggest this to Fox as a show, but basically you need to hire your villains to figure out your vulnerabilities. And this seems like, absolutely a Fox like 10 p.m. show, maybe Kiefer Sutherland is involved, where you're taking people who broke the law in hacking, and instead of sending them to jail, you put them to work trying to hack the electrical grid, to point out vulnerabilities and figure out what's going wrong. And look, this isn't that romantic movie notion of like a wacky guy in his basement who's hacking it as a prank or to prove he can do it. This is China and Russia and North Korea trying to disrupt American lives. Like this is absolutely a sort of unknown war that's going on. And obviously we haven't had massive problems. So we do have some fail-safes and some protections built in, but that's a game we need to step up. And, this is a military operation. Like we are being attacked by other countries and we need to treat it as such. But to do that, again, you need the best and the brightest, and you might need some people who otherwise would be up to no good. And you say, hey, look, do you want to do things that are crimes and you might go to jail, or do you want to make a lot of money and work for the electrical companies or the government or whoever it is who's protecting this? Obviously, there's some level of this going on, but I think we are a pending disaster here. And, might it be a Texas-like short-lived disaster where, yep, a government can bring down our power grid, but we can bring it back online pretty quickly? That's possible. But I do think this is one of those prepare for the worst situations.
Yeah, we're not even talking about power, Dan. We're talking about water. We're talking about dams, hydroelectric plants. there are so many utilities that are quasi-governmental. Maybe they're privately held. Maybe they're part private, part government. There's a lot of vulnerability here. Dan, we're going to have to leave it here. I think we could do probably an entire special on this for many years. We're not going to do it today, but I think we hit all the key points. Dan Klein, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Have a topic of interest, someone you think we should talk to? Then drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the information in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, so much more, check out today's edition of our newsletter, The Morning Pulse. We're back again tomorrow, so until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.
Are you being audited and do you owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes? Is the IRS threatening to take more of your money? Don't fight the IRS alone. The Tax Doctor is here to help you negotiate your tax bill and reduce your stress. The IRS can freeze your assets and seize your bank accounts, but you can stop these IRS actions. The Tax Doctor will work with you using our years of experience to represent your case to help you get the best resolution under the IRS guidelines. Help is here to deal with the IRS to reduce your stress. We've handled thousands of cases, so we know what we're doing. If you owe $10,000 or more in back taxes, do not call the IRS alone. Call a Tax Doctor now for a tax emergency analysis.
Call 800-224-6439.